Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Gang, in early September, just as the federal election was kind of heating up, the Syrian refugee crisis was kind of hitting a breaking point. Suddenly, it was all over the news. A lot of that had to do with this picture of a 3-year-old boy. His body was washed up on a Turkish beach. His family were fleeing. It's a picture that I tried my best to avoid because, as I mentioned before, I have a 3-year-old son, and I couldn't stand to watch that body of this poor boy who lost his life as his family tried to seek refuge. I have seen the picture. Of course, it was almost unavoidable, and it just cuts me in half. It's a punch in the gut, and I think it was for a lot of Canadians. I think when they saw that picture and really understood how bad this crisis was, they start to take notice, and then as it should have, became an important piece of our federal election. So today, the Justin Trudeau government has been elected and has promised 25,000 refugees to come to Canada before the end of this year. But now, after Friday's terror attack in Paris, with some news outlets at the time reporting that some of these terrorists might have actually come as a Syrian refugee, certainly a lot of people are suddenly nervous about letting so many of these immigrants in so quickly. So, all that being said, we have invited Justin Ryan from MAGMA to come in to help us at least get a sense of the situation, how it's going to affect Canada, and how it can affect Moncton, and as we mentioned on the phone, maybe debunk some stuff, because there's a lot of bad talk going around right now.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk about that, but let's back it up and understand why these people are fleeing. Can you give us kind of an overview of what the situation is in Syria and why people are trying to leave?
It's a very complicated situation, much more complicated than most people realize, because really there's essentially 3 wars all happening at the same time in Syria. That's not just involving Syria, but involving major players from across the earth. You've got one level, which is the civil war that's happening, and depending on which side you're taking, it's either the rightful Assad government trying to be overthrown by terrorists, or it's the oppressive dictator Assad who is trying to be overthrown as he should by the population who have been oppressed. And there are arguments for both sides about which one that is. So that's creating a civil war within Syria itself. Now, the second more complicated part of that is who's on whose side. Because on a geopolitical side, you've got essentially the West, the US, the European Union, particularly with France now obviously clearly coming in, and England and several other ones that are key on the UN Security Council and are permanent members, saying, actually, we don't like Assad, we like the rebels, so we're going to support those. Then you've got the other side, which is Russia and China and several other countries saying, actually, we support Assad. And so when one's trying to make a move in the Security Council, the other ones are vetoing, and so these are being played out, and one side is giving support, military support, training support, money support to one side, and the other team is supporting the other side. So it's not just the 2 players in the civil war that's happening, it's these huge international players who are backing one side or the other.
And it's all being funneled essentially through Syria.
Into Syria. Now the third thing is the rebels are essentially one side of, or one sect of Muslim, which are the Sunni, and the government is made up mostly of Alawites, which is an offshoot of the Shiite. So you've got the closest equivalent would be like a Catholic Protestant split. So
right.
Christians, however, and just like in my home country of Australia, here in Canada, Catholics and Protestants can get on quite well and there's no problems whatsoever. When you've got the same dynamic happening in, for example, Northern Ireland, you've got terrorism and violence happening between the same things. So in some places, Sunnis and Shiites get on fine and those countries are completely peaceful and there's no problems. In other ones, this is a major tension between these two factions within the Muslim faith. So the rebels are essentially Sunni and the government is essentially Shiite. So you've got the local Sunni countries such as Saudi Arabia supporting the Sunni rebels. And then you've got the Iranians and the Iraqis and so on supporting the other side. So there's a holy war aspect as well as the geopolitical war happening as well as the civil conflict that's happening. And it's all this massive amount of spiritual and geopolitical power is all being concentrated in this massive conflict in a very, very small country. And the results are devastating for the local community. 1 out of 3 people being killed there is a civilian.
That is ridiculous.
Over 10,000 children. We've got like 250,000 people being killed in this conflict. And if you see the images, the cities are in ruins, the places are in ruins, and this is escalating. This isn't quietening down. This has been going on for years. There's massive bombing campaigns. Major cities are being blown up. And people are fleeing. Like if it was me, I'd take my children. I've got little kids, I've got to worry.
I think that you have to understand, when you look at these refugees, what they're doing, what they're going through just to get out of there,
right.
and even the level of life that they now have to live if they get out of there in these refugee camps. You have to think, well, how bad was it over there to begin with? And when you find out, you go, wow, that's really bad.
I was just talking to friends of mine, I was like, oh, we want to go out to Ontario, but we'd have to drive, and it's a long trip for the kids. And I was like, if that's what you go through just transporting your kids in a luxurious, safe environment where you can pack and prepare, what would it take for you to say, actually, I'm going to leave Canada, I'm going to leave my home, I'm going to leave everything behind, all my money, all my assets, my connections, my home training, and I'm going to take my child with basically nothing, my family with basically nothing, for months, living off the streets, like hoping that I don't drown, hoping that I don't get shot.
Right.
Like, what would it take for you to be forced from your home and to want to do that and to travel across country to country to country to think, actually, that's safer and better than what I was leaving behind.
This is a better option.
This is a better option. Then people are like, oh, go home. There's no home to go to. That's not there anymore.
Obviously, absolutely terrible over there. If we shift it over to what has happened in Paris, and I think now's the time where I did kind of want to mention how one thing that I thought was kind of interesting that came up on social media mostly is the idea that if you think it's bad for Paris right now, what happened, these bombs going off, these people in Syria, they deal with that every day. With Paris, it was the attacks on Charlie Hebdo in January, and now this. It's scary. Absolutely, we're not gonna diminish that by any way. But this is something that these people have to deal with on a daily basis. I can't imagine the idea of going into work, thinking, my life is on the line here. My life is on the line. If I stay in my house, my life is on the line. If I leave my house to go to work, there's no security there at all. There's no sense of feeling secure or safe.
No, absolutely. And one of the challenges is the fear running through everything, because fear makes people do crazy things. People don't, well, why would you blow up Paris? Because they don't understand that, there's the Allied forces and they're supporting one side, and part of that side that they're against is blowing up bases that are controlled by ISIS, so ISIS are attacking back into the countries that have been attacking their efforts to take over and take advantage of the conflict that's happening in Syria. But even more importantly, what they don't realize is that ISIS doesn't want the refugees to leave. That for a long time, very publicly, wanted to control the population, keep them in there, radicalize them, control them, detain them, and convert them. And they will do anything to make sure that refugees don't leave Syria. So anything they can do to make the rest of the world fear refugees and hate refugees. I mean, there's a lot of debate right now that the passport that was it was a Syrian refugee, and that means that all refugees are terrorists. There's a lot of discussion that maybe actually it was a forgery and it was a plant in order to create exactly this. Now, we don't have the evidence yet one way or another, but it's certainly part of a very large campaign that ISIS is trying to put forward in order to make sure that the rest of the world doesn't take in refugees, that they don't have an option to leave anymore, and they're very happy to see, you know, US state governments and those kind of things saying, no, 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 we don't want them, we're going to send them back, we don't want to open our doors. This is playing right into the hands of the people who are trying to radicalize and control people who are completely innocent and trying to flee a conflict and get out of the way of what is a global war happening on a local scale.
Incredible, and I think that's one thing that is disappointing is when you hear all, especially coming out of the American election right now, the Republicans, they're on this very strong anti-immigration, anti-refugee kind of kick right now. For them, it's we're going to well, people like Donald Trump, let's say, is saying we're going to, you know, the people that are here, we're going to ship them out, let alone let people come in. We're going to a break. Stick around, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back. We're going to discuss about this topic a little bit more after this break. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. We still have Justin Ryan here with us from MAGMA. We're discussing the Syrian refugee crisis that is going on. You've held a conference last week, was it?
Last Thursday.
Last Thursday, kind of addressing the government's plan to bring in 25,000 refugees by the end of this year.
Well, the purpose of the meeting wasn't to address how the federal government's bringing in 25,000. It's to work out how local Moncton is going to handle the 200 to 300 that are likely, based on just splitting up the population relatively equally, to be arriving here. The federal government hasn't announced the plan. We don't have the details. So our response as an immigrant settlement organization that also as part of that resettles refugees is to make sure that everybody is simply battening down the hatches and getting everything in line so that when the plan is announced, that we've already done all the preparation work. You know? We want to make sure that we've got all the volunteers not only in place, but they've been trained and given some cross-cultural training as well, and some experience about how to deal with it, that we've got the infrastructure to support with them, that the meeting was not just held by MAGMA at all, it was actually all three of the municipalities came along. We had the Red Cross there, we had immigration lawyers who specialized in refugee sponsorship and private sponsorship there. We had the Atlantic Baptist Church Convention, who has done a lot of that already to lend their voice of support. So after people could hear how they could be involved, they could go in, sign up. But of course not everybody could get there, which is why we made sure that they could continue to contact places like MAGMA to say, how can I help? How can I be involved? What can I donate? What can I give? How can I volunteer? What can I do? Because I understand that it's not their fault. They didn't want to be part of this. They're caught in the crossfire. They're coming, they've got nothing. How can I show them what it means to be a Maritimer, show them great heart, and open our community to them? How can I be part of that? And while I was sitting waiting for this interview to come through, I was watching my inbox fill up with volunteer applications and offers of help just in that short time. So it's been an unbelievable outpouring of community support.
That's fantastic. I wanted to kind of, but before we get away from the whole crisis as a whole and what our community can do, I wondered if you thought that maybe unfairly the media focused too much on the actual refugees leaving and the whole problem that it was creating in Turkey and Lebanon, where they're landing or whatnot, as opposed to also spending a lot of time focusing on the hardships that are happening within the country of Syria.
I think that originally, for a long time, the media was covering what was happening in Syria, and as the refugees moved, that the story naturally moved with them. As they landed in all these other countries, suddenly that became where a big part of the story was playing out, and quite correctly, and therefore the conversation shifted to those countries as opposed to the original point of the conflict.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is because I feel that something like that might have been able to I mean, I don't see that as being obviously so much a problem in Canada. Canada seems to be, and its population, on board with helping these refugees come to our country. But now with what happened in Paris, there is kind of that pushback of some people saying, well, hold on now, you know, this could be a security concern, and obviously we've seen a lot of this in the United States as well. So I wonder if the coverage, even continued coverage today, of what is actually going on in Syria at that level, I mean, it's easy to get muddled with all of that, as you talked, that political climate. It gets very complex, but if, you know, breaking it down to the fact that these people are living in a war zone, on the day-to-day basis of what these people go through, it's literally life and death whether you're going to wake up the next day.
Absolutely, but it's very easy to go, well, that's over there and that doesn't affect us. And that we've been talking about that story for a while. Suddenly it's come into a sphere we do know, we can find on a map and we can relate to, because my uncle went to Paris and he had a wonderful trip there and he might have been there at the time. Suddenly it's a very relatable and genuinely so security concern. Of course, I'm going to be working extremely closely with refugees. My family lives in this community. Of course, I want to make sure that the security process is as thorough as possible to go through. And so all of us are watching very closely at all levels to make sure that when we've got the refugees coming through, that we're all very, very comfortable with the level of security that's being done, because the vast majority of people coming through, there are hundreds of thousands of children, there are old people, there are people who are beyond even being considered realistically to be anything like a security risk, that will still be completely and fully vetted, but are naturally at the front of the line for who gets chosen as the most in need, at the most at risk. So the ones who are most at risk and the most vulnerable are actually the least vulnerable in terms of the security risk that's going on, but also the only way that they get referred through to Canada is they come through either the United Nations body that refers them, or it's a private sponsorship saying we know them and we're looking to sponsor the family coming over here.
And of course, in which case, completely vetted, security checks the whole way through.
And this has been going on. I mean, while we've just noticed and the federal government's just been elected and this has been going on in the background for years. There's been people in the refugee camps for years, and there's been a vetting process that's been going on all the way. So the idea that we're just starting to vet now, and we suddenly have to get it all done in 5 weeks, is not a realistic analysis of what's really happened over the past years.
People tend to forget that too. A change of government means, okay, then you might have a different minister at the head of, you know, at the very top of it, but the federal workers that work for that department, they haven't changed. No, they're still the same ones there plugging away trying to get this done.
It's the same people on the ground, the same people who've been doing security checks for a very long time. So the people who are coming through, it's at the end of that process that's now like getting them from there to here is the very final tip of that. And a lot of people are forgetting the contributions that refugees have made along the way. I mean, MAGMA, we've been settling refugees into our community for over 35 years, and they've made fantastic contributions. They've been amazing members of the local community, from like through the Vietnamese boat people and the people fleeing from Kosovo. And this isn't the first time we've had refugees in our region. This is not actually a new thing. This has been going on for a very long time. This is just the next wave that people are noticing and talking about, and it's become a discussion, but it's far from the first wave of refugees to come through our area.
Let's just say a large number does come to Moncton in a short amount of time. How big of a challenge is this for MAGMA and the other organizations that bring in these refugees to our community?
If we'd never processed a refugee from the airport through to citizenship before in our lives, this would be an enormous challenge. Okay? But while it's taking what for us would be a 4-year target and putting into 4 weeks, it's obviously very compressed, but the infrastructure's there. The way to do it is there. The settlement manual for how to go and what to show them and how you got to show them to how to tie a scarf and wear a toque and use Canadian-style apartments and do all those kind of things. We've been doing that for a long time. The medical services have been doing that for a long time. The government social services have been doing that for a long time. But so right now, we're just getting ready for whatever the plan is. Around MAGMA, we've got all the volunteers. We've got more coming in. Thank you very much for thinking to put the...
yeah, I want to, do we have the graphic up of the email address? Yes. We have it, there he is, yeah.
So anybody who's interested in being involved can go to that syrian.refugee@magma-angm.org address and say, hi, how can we help, and be part of the process as well. But the most important thing to remember is, like, we're preparing now for whatever's coming. And everybody who could possibly be involved, I was talking to you before saying if you go into a hardware store around Gagetown, there's nothing to be found because they assume that they may be part of the solution and therefore proactively they're getting ready. We assume we're being part of the solution, so we're getting proactively ready. So whenever the plan is finally announced, that we've got all the ducks in a row and we're ready to respond accordingly, even though it's a large number in a short time frame. Can we do it without community help? No, hence the bottleneck.
And I assume, as you mentioned, the community has really accepted this open arms. I would assume that you haven't heard too many people complain about this at all.
No, you're always going to hear negative chatter when it's something like this. When there's an element of religion, when there's an element of race, when there's an element of immigration and the foreigners and those kind of things, it's always going to be a contentious issue. However, the overwhelmingly positive support that we've been getting from the community, every time we're feeling dispirited when we hear those things, we just look at the actual help that's arriving, the actual community support that we're getting. We're like, actually, you know what? People are good people, and it's a good community, and they're ready to support, and they've got great heart, and they're apprehensive, and they want to make sure that things are done right, as we do. But they're ready to do what they need to do.
That's fantastic. I mean, obviously, this is a very important issue. I hope that Moncton can be part of the solution, as I'm sure Canada really wants to be part of the solution. I thank you so much for coming in and explaining this for us. Thanks so much, Justin.
An absolute pleasure.
Everybody, thank you for watching the show. I want to thank my volunteers for helping me out with the show as always. I cannot do it without them. So please come back next week for another episode of Hub City Now. See you later.